Hello, and welcome to the SMU Video Archive series. In this series, we interview members of the SMU community who can provide insight into the history of SMU, especially from the perspective of their time at the university. I'm Tinsley Silcox, Director of the Hamilton Arts Library, and today we have with us Lloyd Pfautsch, Professor Emeritus of Music in the Meadows School of the Arts. Dr. Pfautsch, welcome. We're glad to have you here for this series.
Thank you.
Your career at SMU spans 5 decades.
Right.
From 1958 into the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if you could just start by telling us a little bit about what brought you to the university, what you found when you got here, within the School of Music, within the division of Meadows, and so on.
Well, I'll start with reverse. Meadows was not in existence at that time.
That's right.
What brought me here was a curious gathering of needs here on the campus. The School of Theology and the School of Music were both interested in beginning a Master of Sacred Music degree program. And they searched for someone to fill the post of director of that program. They interviewed several people, and I was one of those who was interviewed. I was fortunate in that, unlike others that they interviewed, I had a Master's of Divinity degree from Union Theological Seminary and a Master of Sacred Music degree from Union Theological Seminary. And then I had 10 years of teaching experience, plus the fact that I had some good professional experience, like, for example, singing with Robert Shaw's chorale and Toscanini's chorus at NBC in New York. And so I was asked to come for an interview, and I met with almost the full faculty of the School of Theology and a number of the faculty in the School of Music. Of course, the two deans met with me several times and explained to me what their hopes were. And I was told that I would have to be, I remember President Tate told me that what they needed was a catalyst. And I thought that was an interesting way of putting it, but I must say I didn't quite realize what was involved in being a catalyst until I got here.
What did he mean? He wanted someone to spark choral music, spark the interaction between the School of Theology and the School of Music?
Primarily the latter. And it wasn't that neither school was interested. They both were interested. It's just that their curricula and their ideas about the MSM degree program differed. And so I was sort of like in no man's land for a year. I chaired a committee made up of the two deans and 2 members of each faculty. These 6 people were wonderful to work with. They had a deep interest in the program, the cooperation. I couldn't have asked for better cooperation. We had to iron out the misunderstandings that existed between the 2 curricula. For example, at first, they wanted a 60-hour degree program for a master's degree, when normally it's 30 hours, and at that time, 30 hours for a Master of Music degree, 90 hours for a Bachelor of Divinity degree. And they wanted it to be equals, 30-30. Well, it took me a while to convince the School of Theology faculty that this was primarily a Master of Sacred Music degree program, not another divinity degree program, and that most of the students coming in would not have the normal expectations in terms of undergraduate curricula to meet the requirements, entrance requirements for the School of Theology. They would for the School of Music. And so ultimately, to make a long story short, they agreed on 40-20. I really don't, since I've been out now for 9 years, I'm really not up to date on what the exact relationship is today, but I know it's much less than 60.
But your position evolved, didn't it? I mean, you even became, for a time, the division chair of music.
Yes.
You were an associate dean, and ultimately it led to a position as director of choral activities.
Well, that was at the initial appointment. No, when I came, I was director of choral activities, but I taught in both the School of Music and the School of Theology. I thought I would have fewer hours when I came here from Illinois Wesleyan University, where I had like a 20-hour teaching load and rehearsal load. Well, it ended up that I had about the same thing here. So I met myself coming and going, but I had a wonderful time because I taught hymnology, history of church music at the School of Theology. And in the second year I was here, I took over from Dr. Fred Gailey, a New Testament professor, who was really a Renaissance man. He was a wonderful scholar, had been a teacher in Japan, was an organist, choir director. He directed the Seminary Singers. But I took that over the second year, and then I taught choral conducting and vocal and choral techniques, and directed 3 choral ensembles in the School of Music. So I had a rather hefty load, so to speak.
Were all of the theology students required to take courses in hymnology? I know that now we recognize how important it is for ministers to understand the music side of ministry. But was that the case, or was it an elective?
No, it was still rather in the, shall we say, the Paleolithic stage, which was true of most seminaries. It was true at Union, where I went to school. For example, they had hymnology as an elective, and they created a new course on the history of church music, which I was to teach. I would have 2 hours of lecture, but for those 2 hours, they were not expected to do any reading. It was strictly lecture, and it was 1 hour of credit in a 3-hour course of hymnology, which seemed very strange to me, how that could be related, except that since they were taking homiletics about preaching, at least part of the service had to do with music. And although, would you believe it, some years later at one of the local churches, Methodist minister, in introducing a morning service would have music by me, which is a day for dancing. And he said, I hate to say this, but Dr. Pfautsch is the only one who gave me a B in my 3 years at Perkins School of Theology. And I was, struck by the curiosity. This was for 1 hour in a 3-hour course that was 2 hours of homiletics. But I don't know whether I gave him a B or not, but I got the blame for the B.
The way music has been on this campus over the years has obviously changed, and the level of scholarship in the music division, what's happened as far as its importance on campus. Can you talk a little bit about your experience from the late 50s? What was required of the choir at that time? Were you participating in events on campus on a regular basis?
Oh, yes.
How did that evolve?
We were very active on campus. In fact, I started Christmas caroling. I started the annual Christmas concert, did larger works at Christmas time. Fortunately for me, there was a tradition of touring because I was interested in continuing that. I felt this was important for PR. It was important for the students to gain the experience of having to sing every night under different acoustical environments, to see different parts of the country. It was educational for them. They were in the homes of Methodist laymen at each church that sponsored us. And that in itself was not only PR, but educational for the students. So I welcomed that and appreciated that. The Seminary Singers also toured. And at that time, it was primarily all male. And like, for example, I had 60 men in the Seminary Singers. And these were men who had sung in their college choirs or in their college glee clubs. And they were more mature than the normal age range of undergraduates. And gee, it was a pleasure to work with a group of that size. And they were not only experienced, but they loved it. They had a typical glee club attitude toward the group, if you know what I mean by that.
Yes.
Yeah.
What would a typical tour have been? I mean, how far did you go afield from Dallas?
Oh, well, when I was teaching in Illinois Wesleyan, I remember that a week before we sang in St. Louis at a big church on Kings Highway, the SMU choir had been there on tour. I knew they toured to the West Coast a couple of years before I came here, so I knew they had some breadth. And they were interested in not only serving the jurisdiction, which was important, but they also wanted to represent SMU throughout the country. And so I began a system of moving in one direction each year, north one year, east, south, west, and just rotating that way. And then trying to not necessarily go back to the same churches, although many times this was true because they happened to be good places in which to sing and eager to have us, but try to sing in different locales. We went to the West Coast. We didn't go too far east because somehow it's further to go east than go west. But we toured all over Texas, up to South Dakota, and the students really enjoyed it because for many of them, this was their first time to get out of Texas.
Right.
In fact, it was very interesting. One year, the president at that time made a statement at the beginning of the school year that SMU had moved from being a regional school to a national school. And so after the opening convocation, which he had addressed, I went back to my office and looked at my previous year's roster of students, compared it with the first year I was here. The first year I was here, I don't remember the exact percentage, but this is approximate. The first year I was here, out of 45 in the choir, 35 were from Texas. The year previous to the year that the president spoke, it was just reverse, or about 34 from out of state and the rest from in-state. So we did do a promotional job for the university.
And that was over a span of how many years?
Well, at that time, that would have been about 20 years, or 22 years.
Any one single event that's very memorable out of all the tours that you took, someone who heard you or a particular location in which the choir sang? Or
each one, of course, had its own attraction, but I think, I don't remember whether it's 2 or 3 years before I retired, it was a very memorable tour because we sang in Nashville, and the students had a chance not only to see Methodism's home, Methodism's Mecca, but outside of Nashville, they visited Andrew Jackson's home. And then, of course, we also visited the home of Martin Luther King in Atlanta. And the group sang in his church. And the choir was deeply moved by that experience. You could tell not only by their deportment, their sense of awe, and also their sense of dedication to what they sang in that church, and as they visited the memorial there. And then when we got to Montgomery, and we visited the church that Martin Luther King had served there, and saw the memorial where the names of those who were killed in the demonstrations in the memorial, and you walk around and read the names. It was a very moving experience to watch the faces and the looks in the eyes of the students as they encountered this part of our nation's history in a way they had never encountered it before. Also, another year too, we visited Lincoln's home in Illinois, Springfield, and his tomb. I don't think I ever saw the choir in a more serious mood and attitude of respect and devotion than they were at that time. And it was so happened we were singing a setting of some words that ended Adlai Stevenson's speech before the National Democratic Convention when he was elected a nominee. I see in America what he saw in the future. And they asked the custodian of the tomb if they could sing that there, and they were told yes, of course. And of course in that tomb, it just was like being in a big cathedral. And afterwards, the custodian came up to me and said, "Nothing has ever moved me like this before, and I've been here for years." And I said, "Well, you could probably tell that the students were moved too." So this was a very moving and learning experience for them. Those two come to my mind immediately.
Mm-hmm. So many choristers in a university choir are not music majors.
Right.
And go on to varied careers.
Right.
Do you still hear from students from many years ago who have gone on to other interesting careers that have such a real connection to SMU and to the choral music program that you provided here?
Oh, yes. I have, for example, there's a lawyer in Houston who sang in the choir. He was actually from Bloomington, Illinois, where I had been before I came here. But he was a good enough tenor to get into the choir, and he sang 4 years. Went on to get his degree from the law school, and then became a member of, now I wish I could remember, I hope I can come up with the name, but the man who was the lawyer in the Nixon trial in his firm in Houston. And he sent his daughter to SMU, and she became a music major and was a very good alto in the choir. This happened, I had generations of second generation students coming. So in that way, it was another way of recruiting.
Oh, absolutely.
But I've had others, ministers, I've had announcers, TV announcers. I've had many who have gone on to sing at the Metropolitan Opera. I've had some who sing all over the world in opera. And that happened almost every other year. There would be somebody that would move on to an operatic career. So the quality of personnel that I had, not only here but at Illinois Wesleyan too, in retrospect, I realized just how fortunate I had been for over 40 years. The quality of students in both universities couldn't have been better.
The choral aspect of your career here is only really a small part.
Yes.
For many, many years, of course, you've been a composer.
Yes.
I sang your choral music, as we've talked before, even as a high school student, and sang this wonderful music, and that's why it was such a delight to come here and find you here. Talk a little bit about your composition career, how that got started, and how what are some of the outstanding pieces in your mind that you composed, particularly while you were on the faculty here at SMU?
Well, I actually started writing when I was in graduate school. And then I continued that, of course, at Illinois Wesleyan. When I came here, it's sort of like I blossomed, so to speak. I can't tell you what the reason was. It wasn't because I had more time, because I certainly didn't. But I had, for example, 5 groups to write for: the Seminary Singers, the Sunday Chapel Choir, the University Choir, a women's chorus, and the Choral Union. So, and then also tried to have a men's chorus, Glee Club several times. So that's a 6th one. So in addition to having to find music to use with these groups, I also knew that it was necessary to write music for these groups, because like the women's chorus might need music for SASA instead of SSAA. Not enough altos to have 2-part altos. The Seminary Singers might be weak in tenors, so I write for tenors and baritone and basses. So, of course, the University Choir, I could just write any way I wanted to. And so much of what I wrote was what you might call occasional music to fit the needs of the occasion or that year. And then I started receiving commissions, particularly for anthems. And that, of course, made it possible for me to write for a variety of church choirs, some of whom may have only 30 members, some may have 100 members. And as you know, having served as a church musician too yourself, the demands vary. And you may have 50 singers, but they may have limitations. And this was challenging, as well as an opportunity for me to see if I could particularly try to meet their needs within what was happening contemporaneously with church music, like involving the congregation, for example, or involving instrumentation. Congregational participation was very popular for a number of years, and so I did that for the chapel choir. Actually, between the years of 1965 and 90, I would say those were my most productive years. And I can't tell you why, other than that they were those most productive years.
What pieces that you have written or arranged really stand out in your mind, if you had to choose your favorites?
Well, one that I was commissioned to write the third year I was here was an arrangement of I'll Praise My Maker, the Wesley text, which I wrote for the 25th anniversary, believe it or not, of University Park United Methodist Church. That was back in 1961, I think. And I wrote it for 3 trumpets, 3 trombones, and tuba, which was unusual at that time to write for that kind of brass accompaniment. That not only is one of my favorites, but it's also one of my bestsellers. It's been one of the numbers used at National Methodist conventions. It was used 2 weeks ago when Jane Marshall and I were privileged to have a group of alumni gather their choirs together at First Methodist Church. A Day for Dancing is a piece I wrote in the early 70s, which was an attempt to provide a longer, smaller major choral work that could be used at Christmas time by a variety of choruses with wind accompaniment and percussion accompaniment. And it was a setting of 9 carols, medieval texts that told the Christmas story, sort of like the 9 lessons at Christmas time. In fact, I have a videotape of it being done at St. Bartholomew's Episcopal Church in New York City, where it was used in their lessons and carol service. But that has been one of my most widely used works at Christmas time, done Far East in England. One of my recent bestsellers is a setting of text by the Venerable Bede from the 6th century England. Live in this world as one who ceased to serve. And I use a Benedictine chant as a basis for that. Music's Empire is a setting of an English poem dealing with the creation of music as part of God's creation of the world. This was written for the dedication of a new fine arts center of a university in Arkansas. And that has been a very good piece for my royalties. It's been used by all states all over the country, high school choirs, university choirs. I could continue on, but I think that gives you some idea. It's a variety, sacred and secular.
Talk a little bit about the faculty with whom you've worked over the years, the people that stand out in your mind as you progress through all the changes that have occurred in the arts here on campus.
Well, one of the persons who really is prominent in my mind is Dr. Van Katwick, who was here when I came in '58. He had already retired. He had been dean for many years. But when he appeared on campus, it was like seeing the SMU School of Music personified, because to not only the alumni of the School of Music, but to the faculty at large and to the community at large. He epitomized the School of Music at SMU, a wonderful gentleman, an excellent conductor and teacher, pianist, composer. I think retired too early. You know, at that time you had to retire at a certain age. But he is one that comes to my mind immediately. Paul Vellucci is another one whom I had known and met prior to coming here. He was an outstanding professional accompanist, and I first heard him in that role, accompanying for Metropolitan Opera singers, and found him to be as gracious a gentleman as he was a significant musician, piano teacher, composer, and a colleague. Mac Harrell was here, had come from the Metropolitan Opera. I had idolized him as a young singer myself and gotten to know him a little bit in New York. I used to enjoy hearing him sing the part of the Christus in the St. Matthew Passion at Carnegie Hall in New York City, and so I felt highly honored to be on the same faculty with Mac. There were a number of others. Jack Kilpatrick, a wonderful, delightful person, a very fine composer who was very interested in maintaining the historical integrity of the Cherokees. He and his wife were Cherokee. In fact, she was a Cherokee princess. And they were very active in translating Cherokee literature into English and had worked with the Smithsonian in doing this. He has several books that he published, he and his wife published. He was a composer and actually a member of the theory faculty. Oh, I could go on. Herb Turrentine in music history. I'd hate to leave out anybody. There's so many who were influential, and some, like Gene Ellsworth, was very encouraging in the MSM program. He was on the committee. My friends on the seminary faculty, like Fred Gailey, who was on the committee. Joe Quillian, who ultimately became the dean, he was very supportive of the MSM program. And without support of the two deans and the faculty who were visionary, we wouldn't have had that program. It could have been cut, very quickly, because it was underfinanced from the very beginning. What they operated on was the existing budgets of the School of Music and the School of Theology. And in a way, I could see why they did that, because the courses that the sacred music students had to take from the School of Theology were courses that were already offered. The same thing was true in the School of Music. But I finally convinced the theology faculty that this is almost like expecting the men who were in the School of Theology degree program taking graduate program curriculum in the School of Music, like advanced theory or form and analysis at the graduate level, or the medieval history of music. And they realized that this was about the same thing. Expect the music students to take advanced Bible courses. So they finally agreed to arrange the course and the curriculum for the MSM program to meet the needs of those in sacred music. So there were many people that I think back on as having helped me in many ways and helped that program in many ways. Without such interest and common concerns, we wouldn't be where we are today.
If it did change, how did everything change as everything came under the auspices of a Meadows School of the Arts, which incorporated all of the fine arts?
Well, I must admit that there were many in the School of Music who were not happy about that coming together.
And that was what year?
That was I think 1966 or 7. My memory gets faulty when I go back that far. I was in on the planning of the Meadows School of the Arts, or the School of the Arts. In fact, I was chair of the music section of that committee. And I reported to the music faculty that it was a fait accompli. They might regret losing the status as a school of music, but the university had decided that the various art divisions should come together under one school, the School of the Arts. And so at the beginning it was music, theater, and art. 3 divisions to begin with. Then of course it expanded to include other areas of the fine arts or arts, which I think is very significant and was very important, and helped to, it helped to enable the school to reach out into the country to more students and attract more students. Our original idea was that these various divisions or departments of the university could commingle and interrelate in such a way that they, in their interaction, they stimulated each other. And we had an attempt under a dean who tried to effect a curriculum where every department had to take courses in all the other departments. Well, that was a good idea, but it didn't work because each school that became part of a school had national requirements that they had to meet. And so there were only a few hours that could be used by students to take like art courses or to take theater courses and vice versa. Like for example, our grandson who graduated in theater here last year had also hoped to minor in music, but he found out in his freshman year and it was not possible unless he took like an extra year. He couldn't do it in 4 years. But originally our hope was that there'd be cross-fertilization, but just being in one building was cross-fertilizing, because I can remember the first year we were in the building, I talked to Dean Hunter about having a huge Christmas tree in the foyer at the front of the Meadows Arts Center. And then I talked to Jerry Bywaters, who was the chair of the art division. I said, Jerry, would you mind having the faculty member in charge of maybe design or whatever a class you think might be pertinent, create ornaments for the tree. And it was amazing with the creative ornaments that we had that decorated that tree. And then we would gather to sing Christmas carols, all the schools. And that continued for about 3 or 4 years. And then I don't know whether the budget crunch made it impossible to afford the tree, but it gradually disappeared. But there was an example of the participation. Now, my choir participated with the dance department several times and with the theater department, in that we provided choral music for the dance. In fact, I wrote a piece, Bafana, for choir, dance, and instrumental ensemble, which was first premiered in the Bob Hope Theater. And we also did the Britten Ceremony of Carols for the dance department. So there was some collaboration, which all, I think, helped the students to appreciate the contributions other divisions had to make and get to know people in the other divisions.
But you say at the beginning that there was some dissension in the ranks?
Well, I'm talking about School of Music, and it wasn't dissension.
Right.
It was just a case of having to give up the status as a School of Music and become a division in the School of the Arts. Really is just terminology. Because structurally, organizationally, the school or the division of music was exactly the same as it was as a school of music.
What about faculty in other areas, other disciplines of the university that are outstanding in your mind, either from a professional standpoint with whom you worked, or just were friends? Are there other people that come to mind during your tenure here from other schools other than the arts?
I was very fortunate that all of us as faculty members say we hate committee work, but I was fortunate, in retrospect, to be on the committee that set up the School of the Arts, to be on the first committee that set up the University College, to be on the second committee that reviewed the University College, to be on the committee that created the graduate program, MLA program, and I was on the committee that determined honorary degree recipients several times, so that I had a chance to get to know people from other faculties and know them quite well when you deal with committees like that. And I counted it a high privilege. I remember being on the honorary degree committee when we were presented with a request that we approve an honorary degree for the Attorney General Mitchell of Watergate fame. And we voted unanimously no. And President Tate was not very happy with that decision. And because Dean Story, who was dean of the law school at that time, and a very fine person, and internationally known because he was one of the judges or attorneys at Nuremberg, he wanted definitely, because Mitchell was going to come and speak at the dedication of the new law library. And so we reconsidered it, and again we voted no. Now this was before Watergate. Well, you know what happened. And we didn't go around, holding our heads high. We felt vindicated in our decision. Those were hard to make, very hard to make. All the other committees had hard decisions to make. Like for example, MLA program. There were many faculty against that program. It was going to dilute the degree programs out here. A master's degree, which you can take in the evenings and not have the rigorous expectations that you have in a normal master's degree. And we explained that this was an attempt to reach people who are out in the world, so to speak, here in Dallas, who want to do some further study and maybe, not be bound to degree requirements, except to take so many hours in total, but who may mix them up depending upon their interests. Well, and as you know, this became one of our most successful programs, but we had a hard sell, very difficult sell to the faculty at large. The School of the Arts, too, was semi-difficult. I've referred to that earlier. But these committees enabled me to meet people like, Marshall Terry, who's been a close friend for many years, Jim Brooks. Right now, when I wish I had notes that I could refer to people, in the English department, I have many friends in the English department. I feel embarrassed that I can't come up with the names. Biology, business, law. It was a wonderful opportunity to represent the music or the fine arts school to the other schools, because like when we set up the University College, most of the faculty in the other areas, other disciplines, did not realize the demands placed upon, for example, music degree requirements by the National Association of Schools of Music. They didn't realize how limited we were with how many hours we had that we could make available for use in liberal arts studies. Now, we wanted liberal arts, and we had as much as we could get, but we were confined by the National Association of Schools of Music. Same thing was true of the School of Theology, too, with their National Association.
Because there's such a long menu, if you will,
of
courses that are required from these national accrediting institutes.
Right.
And people in other disciplines sometimes didn't really understand just how time-intensive. Basically, you're packing into 4 years just about everything you can, and there are no times for electives.
That's right, or at least minimal time.
Well, minimal time, yes.
And then students would want to take, like for example, the music students in voice, they have to take languages. And it's hard to work them in, 3 languages.
It's true. Well, going around campus and doing all the committee work and being very involved on campus on that level as a faculty member serving on committees is one thing, but having your students, having the choirs being involved on campus. I know that, for instance, your choirs would sing at major events on campus, particularly things like commencement. As a matter of fact, I believe that you wrote an arrangement of the SMU Alma Mater, isn't that correct?
Yes, I did the second year I was here. As a matter of fact, I have a copy, the original copy of that to share with you sometime.
Oh, how wonderful.
Thought you might like to have that. We starting the second year, the choir always sang for the opening convocation. And the reason we could do that was convocation at that time was not held until the Wednesday of the first week of school. So that gave us Monday for the first choir meeting to prepare something to sing for the opening convocation.
That's not a lot of time.
Well, now listen to what happened though subsequently. Then they moved the opening convocation to Sunday. Well, of course, auditions continued until Friday before Sunday. And so that meant I had to determine the personnel of the choir by Friday at 5 o'clock and tell them to be at 9 o'clock on Saturday at a rehearsal so that we could prepare something to sing on Sunday for the opening convocation. Now that was, a close preparation.
Absolutely.
But the students enjoyed it, and I know President Tate always enjoyed it, just expected us to do it. And so did the subsequent presidents.
What prompted your writing the arrangement of the Alma Mater?
The fact that there wasn't any. There was just sort of sung, like a group might get together to sing. The choir would sing it.
Just unison and just the melody.
Or in parts, just barbershop the parts.
Right.
And so actually, I'll tell you what happened. We decided the second year that we would make a recording, hopefully to raise money to go to Europe. And we learned the fallacy of that expectation. But we figured we had a tremendous potential volume of purchasers. We decided to record the favorite song of each fraternity and each sorority. And so we did. And had the record prepared, and we thought it was logical to have the Alma Mater on there. So that's when I did the arrangement. We lost our robes, so to speak, instead of our shirts. The initial sale was very good on campus, but the alumni upon whom we counted mostly had a very small purchase, and that was a very disappointment. So it took us about 4 or 5 years to recoup, and it also made me reluctant to do recording in the future. I was wary.
But at least we have this wonderful legacy of that beautiful arrangement of the Alma Mater out of this, which is nice.
Well, and then every year we recorded the concerts of the choir and the choral groups. So I have, for example, in my own library, I have audio tapes going back to 1959, which was the first tour I made here, actually going back to 1949, which was the first tour I made at Illinois Wesleyan. So from the time I started teaching in 1948 to the time I quit in 1992, I have all those tapes. And for many years, there are tapes from those years in the library too.
Yes.
As you know.
What about any memorable events that stand out in your mind on campus? Whether, excuse me, whether there was participation, say, of the choir or not, a particular commencement speaker or just other events?
Well, you know, it was interesting to get the student reaction to the first year I was here, and we decided to go caroling. We started out on campus, and we caroled in the quadrangles, the dormitories, and in the sororities and fraternities. And we found that they enjoyed singing along with us. And then we went to several hospitals. And we kept that up until the time that they started to have the service of lights in front of Dallas Hall. And then we participated in that for years. We discontinued the caroling because we felt this was taking the place of caroling. And in fact, the very first year we had a hard time ending the service because everybody wanted to sing another familiar Christmas carol, you know, like Frosty the Snowman, not a carol, but, you know, anything Christmas. And to have a couple of thousand students out there joining the choir was a lot of fun. We also sang for what you might call state events, like when a Secretary of State would speak here, or a president.
Really?
Or, let's see.
Which presidents would speak here for whom your choirs have sung?
Bush, I believe. Let's see. Schwarzkopf, General Schwarzkopf. I knew we had sung for a general. We did with the wind ensemble, the Battle Hymn of the Republic, that was it, yeah. And we did that several times for so-called state events on the campus. Many times we would sing in the auditorium here, and we'd sing from the balcony.
In McFarland
Yeah.
Auditorium.
In fact, and also, like for the rededication of Dallas Hall, President Tate wanted us to sing at the end of the dedication service, the Alma Mater. So we went up to the top of the dome, and the people didn't know we were up there, of course. And so at the benediction, we started singing, "Oh, we see." And when we came, you can imagine how it must have sounded down there. Of course, we couldn't tell, except it sounded good to us up there. But when we came down, President Tate came up to me and said, "I don't believe there was a dry eye down here." He said, "That was a wonderful way to hear the Alma Mater." And we did that several times.
So you would sing at the dome?
Yeah.
On several. Those are memorable.
Yes, they are. And it showed what the Alma Mater meant. Now, one year, when it was near the 50th anniversary, they wanted to have a contest for a new Alma Mater. And President Tate talked to me about it. Yes, he said, "Why don't you write a new Alma Mater?" I said, "Well, President Tate, number one, I think the current Alma Mater is sufficiently well-grounded that to try to write something that would have as much emotional contact or impact as that would be very difficult, and that one of the most difficult things to write is an Alma Mater." And so they had some people who sent in Alma Mater settings for the context, but realized they should stay with what they had. And I think
So they actually pursued it to the point
Yeah,
that people
but
were submitting?
there weren't many who had submitted. And I think most people felt it was, battling their heads against a brick wall. Something that's been established for 50 years is hard to change. I even started a seminary alma mater. Dean Quillian asked me if I'd write something that could be a seminary singers alma mater. So I did. And it was used during the years that I directed them. And then after that, I think it was discontinued after several years. It was written for TTBB, for men. And then a year or two after I left, Sam Young came in, and it became it became women and men. Women were so few that they had to sing tenor. And so he had to do things very carefully, choose music very carefully. And gradually they had more women, so the Seminary Singers became SATB instead of TTBB. And I really, while I understand the need for that and the reason for it, I hated to lose the male ensemble on the campus because it was a wonderful group. And as you know, we choral directors have a sort of a predilection for the male chorus sound anyway.
So how long was the men's chorus, the Seminary Singers, actually an active choral ensemble?
Oh, it was active for many years before I came. Dr. Fred Gailey conducted them, and they had been a tradition for many years. In fact, so much a tradition
And he was theology faculty?
he was a New Testament professor. The first year I came here, they were such a highly organized group that when they went on tours, they all bought coveralls with Seminary Singers on the back of their coveralls to wear on the bus. And they had so many in the group that they had to take 2 buses for the group. That meant they had over 60. And I'm almost 70 in
And
Seminary Singers.
these were mostly aspiring ministers
Yes,
or music students
no,
or both?
they were all future ministers. And of course, that was a wonderful experience for them to represent the School of Theology and also to let the people know that they enjoyed singing. And Dr. Geely was very good about providing them with a wide variety of repertoire. And Dr. Young continued that too. By the time he got here and they got to know him, he has a wonderful sense of humor. He found them singing in a manner that he was not accustomed to in Wichita Falls at their final concert. They were singing Schubert's Heilig, 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 Heilig ist der Herr, And it wasn't Heilig, 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 it was something else. And he found out afterwards that the Japanese student who was in the choir had taught them to sing that in Japanese, and they were singing it in Japanese. So he had to explain to the congregation what was happening. And one time too, when we were on tour, we learned that Dr. Furnish had become engaged to one of the students. And so the fertile young minds of the Seminary Singers gathered together, and when we got back, we invited the seminary community to a serenade to Vic and Jody. And they sang their own versions of familiar gospel songs like Victor loves me, this I know, for my diamond tells me so. Little ones make some girls glad, mine's the biggest Woolworths had. Yes, Victor loves me. They went on like that. And Dean Quillian had a big bag of letters from the San Antonio region, clergy and laity complaining about the sacrilegious singing of beloved hymns by the Seminary Singers at the seminary. But the young seminarians were having fun.
How long was your official work with the School of Theology? Did you have a joint faculty appointment
I
the
had a
entire
joint-
time you were here, or?
At a joint appointment when I first came. I came as an associate professor because I had been a full professor where I was. and they told me I could come in as a full or an associate. But I figured that politically it would be wise of me to come as an associate, number one, as a new faculty member, number two, as one coming into two different schools who might have some questions, and might not question it if it was a joint appointment as an associate professor. So, and there was no problem. Then after a couple of years, I did receive a full professorship. But I taught on both faculties. It was assumed I would teach 10 hours on the School of Theology faculty, and I taught like for 14 hours on the School of Music faculty, which was just about what I taught at Illinois Wesleyan, which was a heavy load, really. But then when Dean Borchers retired and we became a School of the Arts, they had to decide on a new dean or a new head of the School of Music. But since that was going to become a division, they decided to call that a chair, like it would be a chair of the Division of Art. And the provost at that time met with all of the faculty of the School of Music and asked them for their suggestions. And much to my surprise, and also to my feeling of challenge, my colleagues and friends on the faculty suggested my name, and so the president asked me if I would become associate dean and chair the music division. And then Dean Hunter was brought in then to be dean of the School of the Arts. So then I gave up my teaching in the School of Theology and assumed the administrative duties of a chair in addition to my classes. And Dr. Young took over the MSM program, the courses I taught there. And after 3 years, I found myself meeting myself, coming and going. In fact, I went from my office down to a class in vocal and choral techniques. And I stopped in my office by the choral hall and picked up what I thought was my notebook for vocal and choral techniques, walked in, and I started talking about where we had left off last time. And we were talking about, I said, remember, we were talking about the fricative R and the problem that creates in singing. And I noticed the students were kind of looking at each other and raising their eyebrows. And finally I said, what's the trouble? What's so humorous? And they said, that's where you left off in conducting class. Oh, and I realized I had brought in the wrong notebook and that we were at a different point in the vocal and choral techniques class and we were in the conducting class. And in my haste to walk down there, I had just thought, fricative R. And I said, no, this is foolish. I need to have more time. I shouldn't have to just walk from an office into a class or even into a rehearsal. And so I just gave up, resigned as the chairman, and went back to full-time teaching. And I was certainly glad that I did.
And who replaced you as chair at that point?
Don Gillis, who came in from the outside. And I had known him in New York because when I was singing in New York professionally, I sang in the Toscanini chorus, radio chorus, and Don Gillis was the producer of the Toscanini our programs of symphony concerts. So I knew him from there. And so he came here. He had never been an administrator at the school level before. And so he decided that he had enough of New York and came here to become an administrator of a school of music, or of a music division.
Well, our time is short. This has been a delightful chat. I wonder if perhaps in way of wrapping up, if you could just maybe share what you see as the major accomplishments of your span of time here, the changes, the significant changes to the university, to the music school.
That sounds like you're asking me for self-aggrandizement.
That's all right.
I am pleased with what has happened in the School of the Arts and its development. We did not know it was going to develop like it did. We had no way of knowing, except that we hoped that it would make an ever-increasing contribution of the arts to the campus, and I think it certainly has done that. I also am pleased with what has happened in our sacred music program. We happen to be really one of the few places in the country that still has a viable Master of Sacred Music degree program extant and still thriving, as you well know. And I think SMU should be proud of that. The alumni, Perkins alumni should be proud of it, and the music alumni should be proud of it. Those are the two major things I would see as occurrences that I'm happy to have been a part of, and I'm proud to watch continue developing.
Yes. Dr. Pfautsch, thank you.
You're
It's been a
welcome.
pleasure.
My pleasure.